You are listening to Data Decoded, a podcast from the Data Justice Hub at Concordia University.
We are a collaborative project aiming to understand how activists gather and make sense of data.
Want to learn how activists are using data to fight evictions and how to use data to push universities to stop investing in fossil fuels?
In this new series, we find out what drives activists and how they use data to further their cause. We find out how data activists work to make the world a fairer place.
To listen to their stories and more, tune in to Data Decoded, wherever you get your podcasts.
Yes. So I am a designer and a researcher, and my work focuses on queer and trans digital cultures, community-based archiving, creative media, and increasingly artificial intelligence, and particularly thinking of artificial intelligence in minoritarian archives, and how we might deploy those tools to build futures from pasts that have been erased. So what the sort of, if there are liberatory potentials in artificial intelligence, how can we find them and mobilize them towards marginalized interests, which historically and presently artificial intelligence is not set up to do that at all. And I am the founder of Queering the Map. So that's my involvement. I founded, I started it 5 years ago. Totally, yeah. I mean, the impulse for starting Queering the Map really came out of a desire to build digital community and learn with my expanded community. Ultimately, one of the ways that I talk about it is that I got bored thinking about my own experiences of queerness and transness. And so because I am trained as a web developer, digital tool, internet-based tools are sort of what I gravitate towards in terms of asking questions, building interfaces as ways of asking questions. And so I used those tools to build a platform with essentially the open-ended question of how queer and trans people experience the world. Yes. Do you want me to start from the beginning of that question?
Yeah, I just want to make sure, just in case my footage is
totally.
Thank you.
Totally. No, of course. So the official description of Queering the Map is that it is a community-generated counter-mapping platform for digitally archiving LGBTQ2A+ experience in relation to physical space. In layman's or expanded terms, it's a map on the internet onto which people can pin a location and add a text-based description of whatever they define as an experience of queerness and or transness in relation to that space. And then once those posts are moderated for hate speech, spam, and unsafe content and breaches of anonymity, so full names, phone numbers, addresses, email addresses, any identifying information that could breach someone's anonymity. They are then posted live to the map. It's the whole world. So in terms of a bit of background, I started it in 2017, at which point it was just a map of 5 of my own experiences. And then over the course of about 3 months, while doing a residency at the Concordia Fine Arts Reading Room, more people, specifically in Tiohtià:ke, Muniang, or Montreal, started adding pins in this area. And then pins started to show up in Toronto or Toronto, then in Coast Salish territories, and then in the United States. And then a couple of pins also in Gadigal territories or Australia. It then, so then there was about 600 posts, and then in a period of 3 days in February 2018, it jumped from 600 submissions to just over 6,000 submissions. And then by virtue of its visibility, was spammed by Trump supporters who created a cross-site scripting attack that injected malicious JavaScript code into the database that created pop-ups that said either "Make America Great Again" or "Donald Trump Best President." So I shut the site down and posted a call for help on the URL because lots of people were still accessing it. And then about 10 queer and trans developers from largely across Turtle Island assembled, and we co-created a moderation system to ensure that that kind of attack could not happen on the platform again. And then in I think it was June of 2018, I relaunched the platform. And since then, it's grown to, there's now over 227,000 submissions on the platform in 24 languages, all across the world, on every continent. You make something nice on the internet and the trolls will come. Yeah. But it was, it was an amazing learning in terms of the importance of moderation system, digital, building like really solid infrastructures as a care practice, like when you're dealing with data. I mean, the data infrastructure of querying the map from the very beginning was really rooted in hyper anonymity, essentially like as anonymous as you can be on the internet, which is like, a very contestable, there's no way to be entirely anonymous. But using a framework that I call data opacity, which is essentially collecting as little data as possible. So only the data required to execute the stated function of the site, which means that which is why there's no user data collected, because I'm not interested. It's not a research project. So I'm not really interested in anything other than the way that people are telling their stories. So the only information that's collected is the coordinate that's submitted, the text that's submitted, and the time and date of that submission so that it can be organized in the database. But there's no user profiles on Querying the Map, which was a really intentional decision, twofold. One, from a privacy perspective, the importance of making sure that even in the event of a data breach, there's actually no data to find. There's no user data to find. So there is no ability to track who posted what story, which was also really important in terms of it being more accessible in contexts where risks of violence towards queer and trans people is significantly higher. And then it also came out of a theoretical investment in queerness as a collective politic, as a politic that resists individualism and individuation, and thinking about queerness as an experience always of relation rather than an individual identity. So we're doing queer acts, we're becoming queer in relation to other queer people, to the world that renders like the normative and the non-normative. And so the idea that there would be like individual user profiles was not, didn't feel like it made, that it echoed the the epistemologies of queer and trans communities, which is obviously very broad epistemological landscape. Absolutely. So when the project started, I don't know if it still is in the description that's on the front end of the website, but there was the idea, which was also taking sort of like a queer approach to moderation, was that everything counts. There was no sort of, it was like a refusal of the moderation process, also because there was no moderation system at that point, because I hadn't necessarily anticipated it being spammed by Trump supporters. And that has more or less stayed the overarching principle. So really the only things that are not posted to the site are hate speech. So racism, transphobia, xenophobia, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Whether or not that is, I guess that sort of becomes slightly trickier in terms of like a more explicit moderation policy. So there's obviously the like, you know, die faggots, die ones that get posted. That's very obvious. The more sort of where there is more of a like active moderation, or like an active politics behind the moderation, is stories of someone might be describing an experience of queerness, but that's rooted in anti-Black racism. And so that one will not make, that will count as hate speech, even if the like experience itself would be like, could quote unquote count. So making, yeah, so that's a very active sort of political, it's not like an environment of free speech in that capacity. And then it's also, and then anything that removes someone's anonymity, so any full names, posts that include full names, first name, last name, are not posted to the front end unless that name is like a notable person. So if someone is talking about going to like a Hayley Kiyoko concert, which like everybody talks about going to a Hayley Kiyoko concert on Queering the Map. Oh, Tegan and Sarah's are absolutely allowed. Who else is there? Yeah, there's Mitski also appears a lot.
Of course.
Of course, but generally, yeah, if it's anyone who is not like a public persona, then those are not allowed on the map. Neither are phone numbers, exact addresses, unless those exact addresses are speaking explicitly to like a historical past. So like, this is the location of the drugstore in Montreal. I think there's like an exact address on that one. And then obviously emails and social media handles are also, so those are blocked. But generally, other than that, there is no, other than those important things to moderate, everything else is encouraged, which includes many stories, like fan fictions about gay or trans polar bears and penguins, fan fiction rewritings of the Titanic, of which there are many, stories of being railed by Aquaman, and then also stories that seemingly bear no, like I'm thinking of one example of this is like a couple of days ago I was moderating and there was one that just says like "The Hill!" and that's the entire post, and that counts. So it's like the context, like I don't, because Queering the Map is creating these like hyper situated counter public. So it's like, I don't know what that means because I don't have a contextual relationship to that hill or the person that potentially posted that, but you might, or like someone in that person's community. So it matters in that context. So privileging opacity as a method of storytelling is really important on querying the map. And so even if I don't understand what the story is about, it will still go through the story, the sort of like the submission, it will still go through. And part of the reason also for allowing and actually encouraging fan fiction slash fantasy slash lies is also trying to think about like what a queer approach to the archive might look like. And I think it's important for communities of people who have historically been already framed as being untrue or unreal. So like queerness as a phase, transness as a performance, as an untruth, trying to buy into these ideas of legitimacy and truth in the context of telling and recording history doesn't really feel like it has a place. And I think like the way that the importance of storytelling and fantasy in queer and trans communities is so huge. So it would only make sense that those stories would also count in a queer archive.
Rise on the track beat.
Overwhelmingly positive, which in some ways to me is quite shocking on the internet, that it's the way the consistent what's the way of describing that? The consistent sort of like feeling, this is the weirdest way to say that. The feelings of goodwill, that people have towards queering the map is really quite astounding to me. I don't know why I'm blanking on this one. Yeah, there's a lot of like, I get a lot of this is so speaking particularly to like the emotional aspects of the project, and the like community care oriented parts of the project. I think it's the way that it's been received and the sort of the sense of I want to say like ownership is maybe a word, slash like investment in the project. I think a lot of people really feel really deeply attached to the stories that they write and also the stories that other people have written on the platform, in a way that has been consistently really moving to hear people's emotional attachments to the platform. And then in the context of academia slash critical art and design practice, which is sort of where I do a lot of work. It's also been incredibly well received as an example, a way of thinking through or making tangible a lot of concepts within queer theory slash affect theory, which is really interesting because it very much came from me predominantly reading Sarah Ahmed and Jose Esteban Munoz. It's their work that made Queering the Map possible. If it wasn't for their writing, Queering the Map would not exist at all. And so it's been really fascinating reading other people's writing about Queering the Map in academic contexts, and seeing them sort of like apply the theory, like apply queer and trans, particularly queer and trans of color and affect theory to try to make sense of queering the map. Just because I'm a little shithead, Sarah Ahmed loves queering the map. She told me in an email. I presented like a talk in front of her, literally standing 10 feet or sitting 10 feet in front of me. And I thought, I was like, I honestly almost didn't do it because I have like an idolatry problem where like Sarah Ahmed for me is not, which is arguably really dehumanizing, because to me, Sarah Ahmed is like literally a god. Like she is like I read her work, to me is like, it's like reading a spiritual text. And so the thought of having to like stand in front of her and like literally cite her to her face while I talked about this project was just too much to bear. Yeah, and it went very well. And we now have email correspondence, which is, yeah, honestly the number one highest moment of my entire life. Oh, and then, I mean, this is actually really interesting, but maybe an aside, but would be interesting to talk about potentially in the podcast, because it's really transformed a lot of my thinking, and I've been doing a lot of writing about this. But another way that Queering the Map has been received is at the beginning of last year, I believe it was March, this Instagram account made an infographic claiming that Queering the Map was part of QAnon, and was spying on the queer community on behalf of QAnon. And this post went like viral, like my friends like all over the world were like, hey, have you seen this? Like, obviously it's not true. And the sort of like the through line logic was, that was the first post. The second one was this researcher at Concordia, Martin LaFrance, I think, who researches alt-right communities and coined this term called pastel QAnon, which is essentially the use of pastel colors, infographics, watercolor, cursive fonts to indoctrinate women and queer people into QAnon. And then this other person, Jay DeSoleil, who was also at Concordia, wrote a master's thesis in which they infiltrated the alt-right community in Montreal and wrote about their organizing tactics from a leftist perspective. As Martin LaFrance also, like, you have to name what the tactics of the people that you're trying to take down in order to understand and move forward. And then Queering the Map also, came, like, I was at Concordia when I made Queering the Map. And so Concordia, because I forget exactly why, I think because this person like had decided that Concordia was evil because like of those people that were there researching the alt-right, and because they were researching the alt-right, they themselves were part of the alt-right. Therefore, Queering the Map is pastel QAnon. And it was a fascinating rabbit hole of digital, I don't even know what the word would be, like information. I honestly don't even, I'm not finding the words for, but it was just absolutely wild. And it gained like some traction and people were messaging me. And this person also did this, like made these claims about other sort of small activist based, like obviously like left oriented activist based like Instagram accounts or like projects, saying that and this person also identifying as like being on the left. And anyone that would like refute the claim that they were part of QAnon, that was one of the tactics that they had identified, was like, that's how you know that someone is part of QAnon, is because they say that they're not part of QAnon. So if you would message this person and say like, hey, this is like, one, untrue, and also like defamatory, like it's it's defamatory. You're also like, people are like coming at me, like it was like, then she would like post this, or this person would post like screenshots of the conversations and point out like, you can, this is how you know that someone is part of QAnon, because like they're resisting, they're like doing this, they're saying that like I'm having a mental health crisis and that means that they're ableist. That like it was wild, to the point where it was so effective in I was like deeply personally disturbing for me. Like I was like very close to shutting Queering the Map down, because I was like, this is so like, how can you turn something that is so, that has been so explicit, like I've been so explicit about the politics of the project, the way that data is collected and handled. How can you sort of spin something to make that and like have it gain traction on the internet? But then, and so then part of my thinking on this is like whether or not this person, this was an account, like a right-wing based troll account, creating this like performance and persona that was like specifically targeting all of these small left-wing organizations / Instagram accounts as a way of derailing them. It was absolutely fascinating. So that's another way that Queering the Map has been received, is that it's an arm of QAnon. It was so if we make the assumption that they were someone where it also looked like they were having some sort of like mental health crisis, sort of typified by the sort of like scattered pieces of information all coming together, and they were like calling out cults. The logic that was identified based like on like people commenting, because the logic was so like hard to track, most people in the there were people being like, oh yeah, like fuck that, like evil like about Queering the Map, but then there were a lot of people that were like, hey, I don't understand the logic, like can you explain what you. And essentially the logic in the post was Queering the Map is QAnon because it was made at Concordia University, and Concordia University is a place that like protects abusers, because this person like really hated Clementine Morgan, who's that person that that has been critical of cancel culture in some ways effectively, in other ways not so much. I don't know really enough about their work to like, that's sort of as much as I know about them, but I know that they're a very like contested person on the internet. And Jada Soleil is Clementine Morgan's partner. So this person just like had it out in a shockingly evil way for Clementine Morgan specifically. And what happened, so the logic then that was revealed in the comments was that when Kate Dissociates was the name of this account, posted some infographic about how Concordia University was like evil. This person was in fucking Melbourne, Australia. They posted about how like Concordia is like evil. It's like a hotbed of like alt-right activity because there's people studying the alt-right from a leftist perspective. And then Queering the Map I guess I don't even remember following this person, but I unfollowed Queering the Map. Like I, on the Instagram account, unfollowed them because they were posting all of this like deeply toxic, like pseudo social justice content. Which is also one of the strange things, because I actually don't even remember following them. But that's sort of beside the point in terms of like my own conspiracy theory against the conspiracy theory that was like woven around Queering the Map. But essentially the logic was Queering the Map unfollowed me when I like blew the whistle on Concordia University. So therefore they are complicit and therefore are part of QAnon. The QAnon thing was just like, and because pastel QAnon uses pastel colors, and Queering the Map is in pastel colors. So therefore, like,
Yeah.
that's as sort of good as it, the logic wasn't really there, but it was like, that was the, but in actuality it was like, you unfollowed me and I'm mad, was the sort of like affective impulse. It's very much like a central part of my life, in terms of the labor required to keep it alive. And most of my work and career has really emerged out of Queering the Map. So I'm very grateful for how it's been grateful to like young, like I was 21 when I made it. So I'm grateful to that little version of me that set in motion what I think is a like really powerful resource that has been constructed by hundreds of thousands of people all over the world, to whom I'm also really grateful. I feel like it's mostly a lot of like gratitude towards the people that have shared so many incredible things on the platform, and the people that it's allowed me to meet and be in conversation about and learn with. Yeah, it's like, I mean, it's simultaneously Queering the Map is like my child and my daddy. She really like owns my life in a big way. Which is also, you know, then there's also less positive feelings in that regard, like the sort of overwhelming, the like intense sense of responsibility for this thing that has been co-created, but that it is ultimately my responsibility to, you know, pay the bills to keep it online, make sure that it's safe, yeah, be accountable to it. So it is definitely an intense relationship.
Prize on the trap beat.
It's primarily me, but I have some friends that help with moderation. There's about 10 active moderators. And then I've also had various friends also help out on some development on the site.
That's
so
good.
it's like a roving cast of like on and off team members, but I'm the girl yeah, primary caretaker. Yeah. That's a really beautiful way of thinking. I think I would echo that. I think it is the legacy that I would like it to leave is, I think there's probably many, but one that I would start with is the importance of when building, I'll be specific to like when building like digital platforms for particular marginalized communities, the importance of using or working with the epistemologies of the community from which you are developing the platform for. So not using the sort of resisting the universal in terms of how web platforms are designed. I think that's one of the things that that I think Queering the Map does so well. And would like to see more projects that emerge from very specific ways of thinking and knowing and feeling the world, as well as I think the project's commitment and communication of the importance of data privacy and data sovereignty is definitely one of the impacts that it's had in terms of resisting the sort of the as resisting as much as possible within the participatory internet, the extractive impulse that arguably all, I mean, there's still like querying the map. I think it's important to say is there's still like that. There's an extractive impulse in terms of the distribution of value, in terms of like that value centralizes. Like a criticism that I would have, that I think that there are other infrastructures that I'm looking into that are sort of more in the realm of like Web3 protocol, not in the douchey broy way, but in the decentralized way and like distribution of value. I don't know if that's like a legacy. This is more of like a criticism, like something that I think that Querying the Map could do better, is that I think like the attribution of, but I'll frame it in the way of like a positive, and then I'll add my critique. But I think the way that Querying the Map negotiates the extractive nature of the participatory web 2.0, as best as I could at the time that I first made it, I think is also a really important legacy for Querying the Map to leave. And then simultaneously, I think it sort of, in the version that it is now, lays the sort of seeds to imagine a different way that that value could be distributed, that would sort of share value amongst users, rather than I think a lot of that value, by virtue of like the way that we love to individualize, sort of like, I do a lot of work to keep Querying the Map alive, and I had the idea and I made it, but it's not really me. Like, I'm not the one writing all of the stories, but it's very easy. It's much easier to, like, obviously, like, you're interviewing me, you're not interviewing, which is like a normal thing. Like, it's like a thing that happens. It's like we want like one person to sort of like be the person. And so I wonder if there are better ways to do that, to distribute that sort of the creation of value. Has there been increased? Yes, actually, I guess. Hard to say. People have asked me this question before, and it's hard to, foot traffic, it's really hard to say. I could not say that I confidently that there is any sort of correlation. It's possible, like, more people were spending more time on the internet. So it's very possible that more people were using it, but even before the pandemic, it would have like huge spikes of like, it kind of functions as like, there's around like, 20 to like 60 posts per day on average kind of thing. And then there'll be like 3 days where like 5,000 posts are added, because it will like pop off. So it's hard to, COVID is such like a temporally promiscuous event that it's hard to say how much COVID is responsible, as much as it getting shared by a particular person on some sort of platform and then exploding. That's a beautiful question. I have downloads of the database on my computer that are also in the cloud. And yeah, those are I guess it's also, I don't know, this is like the least articulate answer. I could probably try to say something like so much more profound.
It's okay.
But on Instagram, there's screenshots of the map. And then there's also, I also have from an exhibition that I did a number of years ago, or in 2019, so 400 years ago. printed tiles of Querying the Map. So there is like a physical archive of some of them, but predominantly it's actually something that I need to think more about in terms of the long-term archiving of the project, because it has been online now for 5 years. Oh, actually, it's archived. It's in the Library of Congress web archives in LGBTQ plus web studies archive. So it actually is being archived.